Hello and welcome to Sleepy Scientist. I'm glad you're here. Whether you've had a long day, a busy mind, or you simply love falling asleep to the sound of science. Tonight we are going to drift with the ice float across seas and step quietly into a dreamlike possibility, forests growing on floating icebergs. Imagine closing your eyes and picturing a towering block of ice, larger than a city, slowly gliding through the open ocean. Its sides shine with a bluish glow, like glass carved from winter itself. Now picture trees rising from its surface, leaves whispering against the wind, birds nesting in the branches, and roots digging into crevices that seem too cold to allow life. That is where our story begins tonight, and it will be a long and gentle one, a journey of science told like a lullaby. Before we step forward, I'd love for you to pause for a moment and share something with me, your location and the time of night or day where you are. It's always a quiet joy to know where the sleepy scientists gather across the world. If you enjoy these sleepy explorations, I'd be so grateful if you gave the video a little like and tap that subscribe button. It helps more sleepy scientists like you find their way here, and it means I can keep making more of these journeys for you now. And so the iceberg floats before you, drifting in the endless dark water. You might think of it as barren, silent, and lifeless, like a frozen mountain adrift. Yet if you lean closer in your imagination, you notice something different. This iceberg is not merely a chunk of ice, it is a floating world, a continent untethered, moving wherever the ocean carries it. The waves lap against its sides as though whispering secrets, and the gulls circle overhead, their cries hinting that there is something alive waiting on its surface. Icebergs are born when glaciers calve into the sea, splitting off with thunderous cracks. Some of them are tiny, small as cottages, but others rise like kingdoms, hundreds of meters tall above the water and stretching for miles below. In fact, only about 1/9 of their bulk shows above the surface. The rest hides beneath the waves, invisible like a secret foundation. To stand upon one is to walk across a floating mountain, shaped by time pressure and endless winter. Now picture this immense stage blank and white at first, as though nature left it empty for new stories to be written. What if instead of staying barren, it became the host of a forest? Think of the iceberg, not as ice, but as soil still waiting for its seeds. That thought alone can feel almost impossible. Yet life has a way of making the impossible seem inevitable. Seeds can drift for miles, spores can ride the winds, and curious birds can carry the beginnings of green without knowing. All it takes is the smallest foothold, the tiniest fragment of moss or lichen, and suddenly the ice is no longer alone. It is wearing a living cloak. Close your eyes a little more, and imagine standing there on the surface of this iceberg. The air is crisp and almost stings your cheeks, yet the silence is warm in its own way. Beneath your feet, cracks run like blue veins through the ice, glowing faintly as though the berg were alive. If you listen carefully, you hear the creaks and sighs of the iceberg, shifting, adjusting, breathing in its own frozen rhythm. It feels less like a block of frozen water, and more like an ancient giant floating through the sea, carrying you gently on its back. Why would a forest grow here? The ocean provides moisture, the winds carry nutrients, and meltwater trickling across the ice creates little rivulets, almost like rivers in miniature. Life doesn't ask for comfort, it asks only for opportunity. And where there is a crevice, a trickle, a pause in the cold, life slips in like a whisper. You may even ask yourself, if something as lifeless as an iceberg can host a garden, what other impossible places might life be hiding across the universe? perhaps on icy moons or drifting rocks in space. These floating forests are not just about Earth. They are hints that the cosmos itself might be dotted with quiet hidden life. Back on our iceberg, the idea of it as a floating world becomes clearer. The top is like a plain, uneven, cracked, and shining with crystals that sparkle in the dim light. The sides are cliffs of frozen glass. You can imagine trees rising here, like sentinels' branches catching sunlight and scattering shadows across the ice. Their leaves would rustle in the ocean winds, making music against the endless silence of sea and sky. A seabird lands in one of the branches, feathers puffed up against the chill, its beak carrying a berry or a seed. Without meaning to, it has planted the first chapter of a forest's tale. The iceberg itself feels like a patient companion, drifting mile after mile, continent after continent, never complaining. It becomes soil without soil, land without land. Every crack is a pocket for roots. Every meltwater stream is a lifeline. Every gust of wind, a carrier of possibility. You stand there feeling it beneath you, and sense how alive even ice can seem when you watch it long enough. Perhaps you smile at the thought this iceberg is not just cold and empty. It is a stage where forests might bloom like dreams. And so the first seeds arrive, the first moss spreads, the first colors soften the harshness of white. Soon these forests on icebergs are no longer a thought experiment, but an unfolding miracle of survival. What once seemed impossible begins to feel natural, as if icebergs were always meant to cradle forests on their backs. The iceberg continues drifting, carrying with it the promise of green, the beginnings of life, and the reminder that even in the most unlikely places, nature will try again and again until it succeeds. And so you stand lulled by the ocean, cradled by ice, and surrounded by a story that is only just beginning to grow. The iceberg carries you farther across the waves, and now the story bends toward the wind. Seeds are restless travelers, you realize. They are like tiny explorers with parachutes, wings, hooks, or shells, each one designed to wander. Some ride the air currents for hundreds of miles, drifting like forgotten wishes across the sky. Others cling stubbornly to feathers or fur, waiting for the right moment to let go. And every so often, a seed lands somewhere utterly unexpected, like the bright white surface of an iceberg. Imagine it, the wind sweeping down from a distant coast, carrying pollen and dust and bits of life, as though it were a postman scattering letters without an address. A dandelion seed might float for days, tumbling, twirling, and laughing at gravity. Eventually it drifts low and sticks against a moist crack in the ice. You bend down in your imagination and see it lying there tiny and unassuming, almost invisible against the glittering frost. Yet inside that speck is an entire forest waiting to awaken. Isn't that strange to think about? If that whole world can be hidden inside something so small, seeds don't always arrive alone. Pine cones drop their cargo onto the waves, coconuts bob like round little boats across oceans, and even grains of grass can travel like dust. On the right gust of wind, they fly farther than you'd ever believe. One study of airborne dispersal revealed that seeds have been caught traveling more than 1,000 kilometers before settling down. You can picture them as little dreamers, hitchhiking across the planet, hoping to find a home, not knowing it might be on the back of an iceberg. The iceberg welcomes them quietly, like a patient host. Its surface might seem barren, but the wind has already left tiny pockets of soil like grit dust from continents, volcanic ash from eruptions, soot from wildfires halfway across the world. The earth sneezes, and its breath leaves crumbs everywhere. Over time, those crumbs settle on the ice and form little dark patches. And when a seed lands there, it smiles, as if to say, "Ah, this will do." If you pause for a moment, you might ask yourself, what does it mean for life to settle somewhere so temporary? An iceberg is not eternal. It melts. It breaks it, drifts into warmer waters, and dissolves. But perhaps that is the secret. Seeds don't care if the iceberg lasts forever. They only need enough time to grow, to set down roots, and to scatter again when the ice finally returns them to the sea. In a way, the iceberg becomes a ferry, a vessel carrying forests across oceans. Picture seeds tumbling in slow motion across the frozen ground. A gust pushes them into a crack where meltwater trickles down, feeding them with the barest hint of nourishment. Moss spores float down like invisible confetti, so small you wouldn't notice them if you weren't looking closely. Some of them settle waiting in silence until the sun touches them just enough to whisper, "Now." And that's when green begins. There's something playful in the way seeds travel. Some are like tightrope walkers gliding along the edge of currents. Others are daredevils flung far from their parents with no way back. And then there are the clinger's stubborn little burrs that hook onto anything that brushes by. Seeds are not passive, they're adventurous, each with its own character. You might imagine them chattering like excited travelers, arguing about who will reach land first, or laughing as they scatter across a cold new stage. And when they land, they begin to rewrite the iceberg's story. What once looked like a palace of ice slowly takes on freckles of green. The surface softens. The air feels a little less empty. A single sprout bending its tiny neck toward the sun can transform the whole mood of the iceberg. It is no longer lifeless. It is dreaming in color. Science tells us that seeds are incredibly durable. Some can remain viable for centuries, waiting patiently in frozen ground or sealed jars of permafrost. A date palm seed found in the ruins of Masada in Israel, nearly 2,000 years old, was successfully germinated by scientists in 2005. Isn't that astonishing? Seeds are time travelers carrying the memory of life across generations. Imagine if one of those ancient voyagers were to find its way onto an iceberg. The forest that grew there would be carrying whispers from the ancient past. As you stand on the iceberg in your mind, you see the wind curl across the surface, tossing a flurry of seeds like snow. Some settle into cracks, others are swept away, but a handful cling stubbornly. You know that not all of them will grow, but even a few are enough, because once the first green appears, it invites more life to follow. Moss attracts insects. Insects attract birds. Birds bring more seeds, and soon the iceberg is no longer empty. So the journey of a forest begins with something as small and fragile as a seed on the wind. You might wonder how many of the things around you once began in the same way, quietly, invisibly carried by chance. The trees in your neighborhood, the food on your plate, even the flowers on your windowsill. All of them started as seeds, drifting, waiting, and finally saying yes to the place where they landed. On the iceberg, those seeds lie quietly tonight, tucked into the snow and dust, holding their breath. The ocean rocks the berg gently like a cradle, and the seeds seem to dream. They dream of roots of leaves of forests that no one yet believes could exist here. And you, standing in the silence, feel a little sleepy yourself, as though the seed's patience is contagious. They remind you that beginnings don't need to rush, they only need to arrive. The iceberg drifts steadily onward, a wandering continent of ice. You have seen the wind scatter seeds across its surface, and you have watched them settle into tiny cracks waiting to sprout. But seeds are not the only couriers of life. Tonight your gaze lifts to the sky, where wings cut across the air. Birds restless, tireless, endlessly curious, are perhaps the greatest gardeners of all. Picture them swooping down from gray clouds, gulls and terns, wheeling puffins bobbing awkwardly, and even a wandering albatross wings stretched nearly 3 meters across, gliding with effortless grace. Birds do not come to plant forests intentionally, yet every feathered landing is an act of quiet generosity. Their feet and beaks carry fragments of soil, clumps of moss, half-digested berries, and sticky seeds that refuse to let go. The iceberg, once barren, now becomes a rest stop, a perch, a nesting ground. With each visit, the birds leave behind the beginnings of something new. You crouch in your imagination and notice a small berry seed pressed into a shallow scrape left by a puffin's claws. It lies there like a stowaway dropped from another world. You might smile at the thought, this puffin is not just a bird, it is an accidental farmer. Seabirds are masters of travel, often covering hundreds of miles in a single journey. In their bellies they carry cargoes of life, berry seeds swallowed in one place and released in another. And when those seeds land in a damp corner of the iceberg, nourished by meltwater trickling past, they have their chance. You may ask yourself, did the bird know? Did it intend to carry the future of a forest on its feathers? The answer is no. And yet, yes, nature is full of accidents that add up to miracles. Birds follow instinct, they feed, they rest, they nest. But in the process, they become gardeners of the world, scattering life like confetti. Seabirds in particular are essential for fertilizing unlikely landscapes. Their guano, rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, acts like the first fertilizer for these cold gardens. On rocky islands, guano has been shown to enrich the soil so powerfully that plant growth is 10 times denser than in places untouched by bird colonies. Imagine that power transferred to the surface of an iceberg. A single nesting colony could transform a patch of ice into fertile ground, darkened by guano, and warm enough to let seedlings take root. You might tilt your head upward now and imagine the chorus, above the cawing gulls, the sharp cries of puffins, the deep-throated calls of penguins in distant latitudes. They come and go, each a courier of seeds, nutrients, and life. The iceberg becomes noisy, alive with wings and calls. It no longer feels like a silent, empty platform. It feels like an airport of life arrivals and departures echoing in the frosty air. Perhaps you wonder, how far can a bird really carry? A seed science gives you the answer. Studies show that migratory birds can transport seeds over thousands of kilometers, sometimes across entire oceans. A warbler might swallow fruit in one hemisphere and release its seeds in another. An albatross circling the Antarctic seas might deposit a package of green on an iceberg before soaring away again. It is almost comical to think of them as postal workers, wings flapping as they deliver parcels of life, each one addressed simply to wherever the wind takes me. Now imagine standing quietly as a flock of Arctic terns descends upon the iceberg. These birds migrate farther than any other animal on Earth, up to 70,000 kilometers per year, from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again. Each one is a tiny vessel, a traveler carrying microscopic hitchhikers across hemispheres. They land, rest, squabble, and then lift off again, leaving behind a little more than they took. Without knowing it, they are writing the first sentences of a forest on ice. And the iceberg responds. It is not passive. Its cracks widen to cradle the seeds. Its surface absorbs the guano and grit. Tiny trickles of meltwater run like veins feeding the fragile beginnings. You can almost feel the iceberg stretching and sighing, pleased with its new role as a host. It welcomes these feathered visitors, humming with the possibility they bring. Think of the irony: birds, the very symbols of freedom and movement, become the anchors of forests on floating ice. They are the bridge between land and sea, sky and soil. Without them, the iceberg might remain silent, lifeless, a wandering ghost. With them, it becomes fertile, noisy, alive. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. The creak of the ice is joined now by the flutter of wings, the cries of chicks tucked into icy nests, the rustle of feathers against the wind. Seeds lie in the guano-darkened snow, protected by the very creatures that brought them here. Soon, tiny roots will begin to push downward, and shoots will stretch upward, timid and hopeful. And you, standing in the middle of it all, realize you are watching the first farmers at work. Not humans, not deliberate hands, but birds, playful, noisy, messy birds. They are gardeners, without trying, shaping the beginning of a green world upon the back of drifting ice. The seeds have arrived scattered by the wind and carried by the wings of birds. But before saplings or shrubs can rise, something smaller, humbler, and infinitely more patient must come first. You lower your gaze and see it spreading across the ice, soft green and delicate. Moss and lichen, the pioneers of nearly every inhospitable place on Earth. Imagine moss as a quiet carpet unrolling across the frost, cushioning the hard ice with gentle fuzz. It doesn't ask for much, just a little moisture, a little sunlight, and a crevice to cling to. Moss doesn't have roots like trees. Instead, it anchors itself with tiny filaments, holding on like fingers, clutching the cracks of a frozen wall. And then it begins its slow, steady work of turning white emptiness into a living canvas. Lichens arrive alongside the moss, and they are even stranger. Picture them like painted patches on the iceberg's skin, yellow, green, orange, even black. Some lichens glow faintly in the light, almost like frost kissed by paint. What makes lichens remarkable is their teamwork. They are not one organism, but two, a fungus and an alga, living together, partners in survival. The fungus provides shelter and structure, while the alga captures sunlight and turns it into food. They whisper to each other in a language of chemistry, and together they succeed where neither could alone. If you bend close in your imagination, you see how they creep into every crack. With patience measured not in days or months, but in decades and centuries, lichens slowly gnaw at the ice beneath them. Some species release acids that help break down rock dust, creating the first crumbs of soil. Others trap particles of dust and ash carried by the wind. Piece by piece, grain by grain, they begin building what every forest needs: a foundation. You might pause here and ask yourself, isn't it strange that such tiny, slow creatures are the architects of forests? We often think of forests as towering, dramatic, filled with life. But those giants only exist because of the quiet work of moss and lichen, silent, patient pioneers. Without them, the seeds brought by birds and wind would never find a place to grow. Science tells us that some lichens can survive in conditions harsher than almost any other organism. They've been found on mountain peaks in deserts, and even surviving exposure to space outside the International Space Station. They are the ultimate survivors, laughing softly at extremes. When they find themselves on an iceberg, they don't see a barrier, they see opportunity. The iceberg itself seems to enjoy this attention. Where once it was smooth and cold, it now wears a patchwork cloak, freckles of green and gray spreading slowly across its skin. If the iceberg could speak, Perhaps it would sigh with relief, saying, "Finally, I am not alone. Someone has come to sit with me." The moss, too, has its personality. It feels like a quiet caretaker, absorbing meltwater and holding it in sponge-like layers. To touch it would be like pressing your fingers into a cool, damp pillow. And in doing so, the moss becomes a reservoir, offering water to the first seedlings that will soon appear. Perhaps you can picture lying down on that mossy patched cheek against its softness, feeling its coolness sink into your skin. The creaks of the iceberg beneath you would lull you like a rocking cradle, and the moss would be your blanket. Even in this unlikely place, there is comfort. From a scientific view, moss and lichen contribute something extraordinary. They begin the cycle of soil creation. As they die, their bodies decay into organic matter. Mixed with dust and guano, this becomes the first fragile soil. It's thin, barely enough to pinch between your fingers, but it is enough. And enough is all life ever asks for. The arrival of moss and lichen changes everything. Now insects might find reason to visit, crawling across the soft patches. Tiny springtails and mites can scuttle between tufts. A beetle may hitch a ride on the wind and discover a feast of microalgae hidden within the lichen. With each arrival, the iceberg becomes less like a desert and more like a home. And you might ask yourself, is there a kind of poetry in the way life insists on beginning small? We admire tall trees and vast canopies, but those exist because of things we can barely see. Mosses whisper, "Let us begin," and lichens hum, "We will endure." That is how forests are born, through softness, patience, and quiet determination. As the iceberg drifts, the moss spreads wider. The lichens paint bolder strokes across its flanks. From a distance, the iceberg no longer looks pure white. It looks speckled, textured, alive. If you could stand above it gazing down, you might even mistake it for an island rising out of the sea. And as you watch, lulled by the gentle rocking of the waves, you realize something simple, yet profound. Life doesn't wait for permission. It grows wherever it can, however it can. Even here on a drifting block of ice, life finds a way to whisper its first hello. The iceberg sways gently, carrying its growing cloak of moss and lichen like a robe stitched with patience. Yet you sense that something is missing. A carpet is lovely, but a forest needs anchors, something that digs deep, something stubborn enough to resist the constant shift of ice and sea. This is where roots make their entrance. Picture the first small plant daring to rise from a crack. Perhaps it is a hardy grass, perhaps a tiny alpine flower, its stem trembling as if unsure. It leans into the weak sun, stretching upward with all the bravery of something so fragile. But the magic happens beneath. Roots begin to probe downward, slipping into icy fissures. They do not find soil in the usual sense, but they press into softened patches where moss and lichen have begun their work, mixing with guano dust and decay. The roots wriggle in insistent, persistent. They are like little explorers, pushing into the dark, whispering to the ice, "Make room for me." If you imagine the roots as characters, they are tireless miners, carving tiny tunnels into a world that seems too cold to welcome them. Every rootlet is a hand, every filament a tool, and with each movement they pry the ice open ever so slightly. Meltwater slips into those cracks, freezes, expands, and cracks the ice further. The plant is not alone in this work. The freeze and thaw of water is its silent ally, turning fissures wider, creating pockets that will one day hold more life. Have you ever thought about how patient roots are? They don't hurry. They don't complain. They simply persist. A single tree root on land can split open a sidewalk slab over decades. On an iceberg, the roots are no less ambitious. They push into the cold until the iceberg, without meaning to, becomes fractured, softened, and slowly transformed into a cradle for life. Science tells us that plant roots aren't just mechanical diggers. They release chemicals that help dissolve minerals, unlocking nutrients trapped in rock dust and ice. In the early stages, these roots would be sipping on whatever trace elements the iceberg carries: iron, magnesium, tiny particles blown in from volcanic ash. It is not much, but it is enough to keep them alive. And as the plants grow and die, their bodies become part of a fragile, thin soil layer. The iceberg itself groans beneath your feet, creaking like an old ship. You feel the roots working invisibly below, tugging at cracks, weaving themselves into its bones. The iceberg does not resist. It accepts, sighing under the quiet pressure. You could almost imagine it as an old giant who enjoys the tickle of roots scratching its back. Ask yourself, isn't it fascinating that even something as seemingly lifeless as ice can become a home when roots decide to move in? The plants don't ask whether the ground is permanent or fleeting. They only ask, can I grow here now? And the iceberg answers with silence, which is permission enough. Look closer, and you see how the first true pioneers emerge. Arctic willow, barely more than a shrub, with roots that snake across the surface. Cushion plants forming dense mats, their roots gripping every crevice. They don't grow tall yet, but they create stability. Their roots hold patches of moss in place, slowing the meltwater streams, forming little green oases. The roots also act as storytellers. Each one leaves a mark in the ice. When the iceberg eventually melts, those tiny scratches and fissures may remain in floating shards, carrying bits of soil and seeds away into the ocean. It's as though the roots are already planning the next journey, the next iceberg, the next impossible garden. And as the roots dig deeper, you hear new sounds in your imagination. Not just the creak of ice, but the faint hum of growth beneath your feet. Roots whisper to one another through chemical signals, sharing warnings, sharing nutrients. It is almost as if the iceberg itself has grown a nervous system. Tiny threads weaving together in the darkness below. The plants above seem grateful. Their leaves quiver in the cold wind, but they no longer feel alone. They have roots to hold them, roots to feed them, roots to promise that tomorrow will come. It is a fragile existence, but forests never begin strong. They begin like this, tentative and trembling, yet determined. Now, when you gaze across the iceberg, you no longer see just a barren block of ice. You see cracks filled with green shoots, moss beds stitched together, and roots disappearing into the depths. The iceberg looks less like a block and more like an island alive with hidden veins and tendrils. And maybe you smile as you think, even in a place of frozen impermanence, roots dare to hold on. They don't know how long the iceberg will last. They don't need to know. All they understand is that this is home, at least for now, and that is enough reason to keep growing. The iceberg sways its surface, patched now with moss lichens and brave little plants that have sent roots into its cracks. Yet a forest cannot exist on plants alone. To weave an ecosystem, you need movement. You need wings and legs, and buzzing hums that tie flowers to fruit roots to seeds. And so, carried by invisible breezes, the first insects arrive. Imagine the wind sweeping low across the ocean, curling around the iceberg's jagged sides. In that wind ride, creatures so small you might never notice them. Tiny midges, beetles, moths, and pollen-laden bees knocked off course from some distant shore. A ladybug clings to a stray feather and lands confused but curious. A butterfly, tired from a long flight, drifts down and folds its wings upon a patch of moss. These insects do not know they are pioneers. They are simply searching for food, for rest, for survival. Yet by arriving here, they become builders of the iceberg's unlikely forest. If you lean closer in your imagination, you hear the faintest sounds, a high-pitched whir of wings, a soft tick of legs scurrying across lichen. Against the backdrop of creaking ice and rushing waves, these small noises feel like the heartbeat of new life. The iceberg, which once seemed so silent, now hums quietly with activity. Pollinators are the bridge between one generation of plants and the next. Without them, seeds might remain dormant flowers unfulfilled. A bee visiting a tiny bloom on the iceberg may carry pollen from one plant to another, stitching together the first connections of reproduction. Even a single midge can make the difference between survival and extinction for a plant clinging to this icy home. You might pause here and ask yourself, how did these insects survive such a journey? The truth is, insects are astonishingly hardy. Some can be blown hundreds of kilometers across oceans, surviving on nothing but air and occasional droplets of saltwater mist. Certain species, like the Arctic woolly bear caterpillar, can even freeze solid and thaw, again resuming life as if nothing had happened. They are wanderers and survivors, perfectly suited to colonize unlikely places. Think of the insects not just as visitors, but as characters. The beetle is a curious explorer, inspecting cracks and nibbling at moss. The butterfly is a dreamer, pausing to rest its delicate wings against the cold before fluttering off again. The bee's tiny workers hum softly, as if singing lullabies to the plants they visit. Each one carries a little spark of continuity, linking plant to plant, patch to patch, until the iceberg is stitched into a web of relationships. Science tells us that, even in the harshest polar environments, insects find a way. Antarctica, though nearly barren, still has midges and springtails creeping along icy soils. In the Arctic, hardy bumblebees pollinate tundra flowers under the midnight sun. It is not unthinkable, then, that an iceberg could host its own buzzing community, carried there by chance, and sustained by the green patches already thriving. The iceberg seems to welcome them. The cracks fill not only with roots, but with tiny scuttling figures hiding from the wind. Meltwater streams become drinking fountains shining like glassy runnels in the sun. The moss holds droplets for them, like tiny bowls offering refreshment. You might imagine the iceberg smiling quietly, amused by the tickle of small legs across its surface. And as insects settle in, the ecosystem takes another step toward becoming whole. Their waste enriches the fragile soil, their bodies become food for birds, and their buzzing ensures that flowers, however few, will turn into seeds. Those seeds, in turn, will have a better chance of spreading, catching rides on beetle shells or butterfly wings, waiting for the next wind to carry them to another crack in the ice. Ask yourself how much of the world's beauty rests on the invisible work of insects. The apples and cherries you eat, the fields of flowers blooming in spring, the endless forests themselves, all depend on pollinators who labor quietly unnoticed. On the iceberg, this truth becomes clearer. Without them, the floating forest would remain frozen in time. With them, it begins to hum, to grow, to dream. Close your eyes and picture it now. You stand on the iceberg, the air cold against your skin. Around you, moss and lichen paint, the ground shoots rise timidly, and birds circle overhead. But it is the insects you notice most, tiny flickers of motion against the vast stillness of sea and sky. They are so small, yet they make the iceberg feel alive in a new way, less like a drifting block, more like a breathing island. The forest on ice is still young, fragile, and improbable. But with the insects here, its heartbeat grows stronger, and as the iceberg drifts on into the endless sea, you sense that its story is only just beginning to buzz. The iceberg has grown busier, moss spreading insects, buzzing seeds sprouting in cracks. But now the scene takes on a richer rhythm. Birds return, not just as fleeting visitors, dropping seeds in their feathers, but as settlers. They choose this iceberg as their nursery, their farmland, their chaotic but oddly generous home. And with them comes an unexpected gift fertilizer, delivered in messy guano-splattered abundance. Picture a colony of puffins landing in their usual bumbling way, wings flapping, feet scrambling against the ice, as if they've never quite figured out how to land gracefully. Their bright beaks, striped like candy, flash against the white, and soon they're poking into crevices, digging out hollows for nests. Not far off, a group of penguins shuffle in clusters, their black and white suits giving them the look of a comical choir waddling to rehearsal. They honk and squawk, their voices bouncing off the icy cliffs, filling the once silent berg with laughter-like sounds. The plants and moss do not mind the noise. They are waiting for what the birds leave behind. Guano, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, is nature's instant fertilizer. In fact, scientists studying seabird colonies have found that soils enriched by guano can be up to 270 times more nutrient-rich than soils untouched by birds. Imagine how quickly that changes things on an iceberg, where every crumb of nutrition counts. Suddenly, shoots grow taller, moss grows thicker, and roots dig deeper. If you bend closer in your mind, you can almost see the plants reacting gratefully. A tuft of grass seems to sigh in relief, standing straighter, greener, more vibrant. Moss glows brighter, sucking up the new nutrients like a sponge. Even lichens, so slow and patient, seem to smile at this sudden banquet. The birds, clumsy farmers though they may be, have transformed the iceberg into fertile land. And yet it's not just the nutrients. Birds bring warmth too. Their bodies cluster together in nests, keeping eggs safe, but also radiating heat into the ice. That warmth is enough to thaw nearby patches, releasing more meltwater, which in turn feeds the plants. The ecosystem feeds itself, plants supporting birds, birds supporting plants. Perhaps you pause here and ask yourself, did the birds intend to farm this place? Of course not. They simply live their lives. Yet by doing so, they cultivate gardens without even knowing. It is a gentle reminder that ecosystems are built not by design, but by countless small acts of living. Now imagine standing among them. Puffins shuffle past your feet, dropping fish and flapping wildly. Penguins waddle by in lines, leaving long streaks of guano behind. Gulls circle overhead, crying out, while terns dart sharply from sky to ice. It is messy, noisy, chaotic, and yet strangely peaceful. The plants seem unbothered. They thrive in the chaos, happy to sip on whatever is offered. From a scientific perspective, seabirds are crucial ecosystem engineers. On remote islands, their guano fertilizes entire forests, sustaining plants that otherwise could never survive. In some regions, humans once mined guano like gold, recognizing its incredible richness for farming. On the iceberg, though, it happens naturally, generously, without anyone asking. The birds simply do what they have always done, and in doing so, they feed an improbable forest. The iceberg itself feels different now. It no longer creaks in solitude, It hums with life. The calls of chicks echo through icy caverns. The splash of fish, carried in by parents, ripples into meltwater pools, and the surface grows spotted with green and white in equal measure. You might laugh softly at the thought the forest is being farmed not by careful hands, but by puffins and penguins, clowns of the sea. Close your eyes for a moment and listen to it, the squabbling, the flapping, the rhythmic sounds of wings lifting off. Beneath it all is the steady hum of plants, drawing energy from the sun roots, pushing deeper insects buzzing from flower to flower. It is not chaos, it is symphony, a strange, messy, joyous symphony of life. Ask yourself one last question before you drift. If guano can turn bare ice into fertile ground, what other overlooked humble things might transform barren places in your own life? Sometimes the smallest, least glamorous offerings are the most vital. And so, on this drifting iceberg, guano becomes gold, and seabirds' unwitting farmers become the caretakers of a floating forest. The forest has a new heartbeat now. It doesn't just grow in silence. It trickles, it gurgles, it flows. For on every sunny day, the iceberg itself begins to melt, and from its frozen skin emerge tiny silver threads of water. At first they look like tears rolling down the face of the ice. But soon those tears link together, joining into rivulets that wind their way through moss grass and lichen. These are the iceberg's veins, carrying nourishment to the plants that cling so bravely to its surface. You might picture yourself crouching down to follow one of these streams. It snakes along a fissure in the ice, the edges glistening as if lit by hidden lanterns. A sprout of moss leans close, dipping into the trickle, sipping like a thirsty traveler. Tiny seeds loosened from feathers, or carried by the breeze catch in damp crevices. They're softened by the steady drip of meltwater, their shells split, and they send out the faintest tendrils of life. It is remarkable to think that just a few milliliters of water can sustain a sprout on such an unforgiving surface. But science tells us how powerful this process is. Each square meter of ice during a warm spell can release up to half a liter of meltwater per day. Multiply that across a towering iceberg, and you have a network of miniature rivers enough to sustain a forest's humble beginnings. You notice how these streams behave with personality, as if each one is a character. One tumbles quickly, rushing toward the sea, with eagerness too impatient to linger. Another trickles slowly, pausing in pockets, gathering into pools that gleam like mirrors. And some choose to seep quietly, invisibly nourishing the roots hidden in cracks rather than showing themselves. The iceberg seems alive, its watery voice constantly shifting, whispering lullabies to its passengers. Pause and ask yourself, what might it sound like to lie beside such a stream in the middle of a floating forest? Perhaps the faint hiss of melting ice, the tinkling chatter of droplets striking stone, and the soft rustle of grasses leaning in. A symphony of tiny sounds, all made from something as simple as ice turning to water. And water changes everything. It not only feeds plants, but also reshapes the landscape. Meltwater deepens, cracks, widens pockets, and carries sediments. Tiny grains of dust, minerals, even bird droppings into small basins. These basins become proto-soil darkening, with each season welcoming roots with greater ease. The forest is literally carved and watered by the iceberg itself, a gardener that gives without asking. Insects return to this gift as well. A beetle stops to drink from a droplet, clinging to moss its shell, glistening like polished stone. A cloud of gnats hovers above a pool, turning the air into a dancing mist. Even birds use the trickles, dipping their beaks into shallow channels, before returning to their nests. Life gathers where water flows, just as it always does, whether in rainforest rivers or on the back of drifting ice. Imagine a small hollow where meltwater collects, forming a pool no larger than a saucer. Around it, moss thickens like velvet, grasses lean inward, and tiny flowers dare to bloom their petals, catching the glint of sun. It is a pond, a sanctuary, a miniature world within the larger world of the iceberg. Perhaps if you lean closer in your imagination, you see dragonfly wings flashing above it, shimmering like stained glass. Science shows us that these meltwater pools are more than scenery. They are critical habitats. Researchers studying Arctic ice have discovered whole microbial communities living in them. Algae, bacteria, even tiny zooplankton. Some of these organisms tint the water faint pink or green, subtly painting the surface of the iceberg. This hidden world thrives in liquid threads, each one an oasis on the frozen sea. The iceberg groans occasionally, as if stretching under the weight of its new rivers. But it does not protest. It seems almost pleased, almost proud to nourish its gardens. You might think of it as an old, patient parent melting slowly so that younger life may flourish. The plants nod in the breeze, the insects hum, and the streams go on, weaving silver across the ice, tracing paths that sparkle under the low Arctic sun. Before you drift, ask yourself, could you imagine forests without rivers, streams, or rain? Could any living place grow without water? And if meltwater is the river of the iceberg, what other hidden rivers might flow beneath the surfaces of your own life, carving space for growth without you even noticing? The answer lies here in the gentle flow of a droplet sliding down a wall of ice, feeding moss, grass, flower, and root. On this improbable floating continent, meltwater becomes the lifeblood, the whispering thread that stitches together the patchwork of the forest on ice. The plants that come next are braver than moss or grass, braver even than the stubborn flowers. These are the shrubs, the quiet architects of shelter. You can almost picture them arriving with determination, tucking themselves low against the ice, as if crouching to whisper, "We will endure." They are not the tall, showy plants of warmer forests. They grow small and close to the ground, their branches twisting like fingers that know how to hold on tightly. Think of dwarf willows and Arctic heathers, hardy species that in other places would barely count as shrubs. But here on the back of a drifting iceberg, they are pioneers of strength. Their branches hug the surface, spreading sideways instead of upward, forming mats and clumps that defy the wind. Step closer in your imagination and touch one. Its branches feel woody, but flexible, built to bend rather than break. Tiny leaves unfold like miniature shields, dark green, to capture as much sunlight as possible in a place where the sun never lingers too long. Beneath the surface, roots snake into every crack they can find, patient miners in search of water and minerals. It's astonishing when you realize how efficient these plants are. Studies of dwarf shrubs in Arctic tundra reveal that they can photosynthesize at just a few degrees above freezing. Their leaves are shaped to trap heat, and some even grow tiny hairs that act like a fuzzy blanket, protecting them against cold winds. On the iceberg forest, those traits are not just helpful, they are essential. Close your eyes for a moment and listen to them. Shrubs don't sing like birds or ripple like streams, but in your mind's ear, they murmur together a chorus of resilience. They say, "We crouch low, we endure, we make space for others." And indeed they do. By spreading their branches, they break the force of the icy wind. By capturing snow around them, they create pockets of moisture that linger into summer. And by dropping leaves that decay slowly into soil, they enrich the cracks of the iceberg even further. Now ask yourself, what would a forest be without undergrowth? Could tall trees ever rise without the protection of smaller companions first? These shrubs are like the careful stagehands in a theater, setting the scene before the main actors step onto the stage. Without them, the larger plants that follow would never stand a chance. Picture a patch of these shrubs clustered around a shallow meltwater pool. Their branches form a ring shielding the tender moss within. Birds flit down to rest in their tangled twigs. An Arctic fox, bold and curious, brushes against them as it passes, perhaps sniffing for food. Insects hover above their leaves, grateful for shelter from the wind. All of this life exists because a plant decided not to grow tall, but instead to grow wisely. Science tells us that shrubs can even alter the temperature of their surroundings. By absorbing sunlight, their dark leaves warm the air just above the ground. Researchers have measured differences of several degrees inside a shrub's protective clump compared to the open ice. To a seedling, those few degrees are the difference between life and death. The shrub becomes a tiny greenhouse, a nursery built from patience. The iceberg itself seems to cooperate. Its surface dips slightly where shrubs grow, as though cradling them. Meltwater streams pause at their roots, offering refreshment. Even the wind respects them, breaking into swirls rather than gusts when it meets their stubborn mats. It's as if the whole floating world leans in to help these plants survive. Now imagine walking through this odd woodland on ice. Around your ankles, shrubs brush against you, their leaves fragrant with faint sweetness. Their branches are so dense in places you have to step carefully, as though crossing soft woven carpets. Beneath your feet, the ice creaks and groans, reminding you of the strange foundation holding this improbable garden. Above, seabirds wheel in circles, carrying seeds that may fall into the shrub's waiting embrace. Would you kneel down, perhaps to see what lives within the tangle? You might find a tiny flower blooming in the lee of a branch or a pool where water gathers, reflecting the sky like a polished mirror. You might notice the hum of insect wings amplified in the calm space they've created. And you might ask yourself, isn't it beautiful how something so small, so modest, can create safety for others? The shrubs would nod if they could, as though pleased with your observation. They are the caretakers of this strange iceberg forest. Not flashy, not tall, but strong in the quietest way possible. And so the floating forest grows denser, greener, and braver. Its shrubs spread outward, clasping the iceberg like an embrace, turning patches of barren ice into sheltered groves. In their low, sprawling way, they prepare the stage for something bigger, still, the moment when real trees arrive to test their luck on frozen seas. And then, as though answering the patient invitation of mosses, flowers, and shrubs, something even bolder takes root, the first true trees. You might pause at the thought, how could a tree with its weight and its thirst possibly anchor itself on a drifting iceberg? Yet here they are, stubborn and delicate all at once. Not the towering redwoods or sprawling oaks of warmer lands, but pioneers suited for the margins, birches with their paper-white bark that gleams against the ice, and willows which in the Arctic often grow no taller than a child, hugging the surface in woody mats. They arrive almost shyly, carried perhaps by seeds on the wind or in the feathers of birds. Picture a birch seed, tiny light as a whisper, a single winged speck that spirals through the air. It lands in the protected hollow of a shrub's embrace, or slips into a crack already softened with soil. There it rests, waiting for meltwater to trickle by, waiting for a shaft of sunlight to kiss it awake. The moment it sprouts feels like a small miracle. A green shoot emerges, fragile but defiant, pushing through grit and ice. It stretches upward, then thinks better of it, leaning low, shaped by the constant whisper of the wind. Willows creep sideways, their branches sprawling like fingers, searching for purchase. Birches bolder stand a little taller, their bark shining pale silver against the iceberg's blue-white face. In your mind, lean close and imagine touching the bark of one of these first trees. It feels smooth and cool, like parchment, with faint rings hinting at seasons endured. If you listen carefully, you might even hear it breathing in sunlight, sighing as it exhales oxygen into the frosty air. Scientists studying dwarf trees in polar regions note that some can photosynthesize in temperatures barely above freezing. Their leaves are small but efficient, designed to capture every drop of energy in short summers. Roots dive deep into crevices, spreading sideways like careful explorers, stabilizing the soil, pocket by pocket. A single tree might grow only a meter or two tall, yet here on the iceberg, it is a giant among mosses and shrubs. And now a question comes gently to you. What does a forest become the moment it gains its first tree? Does the presence of a trunk and branches transform the scattered greenery into something more unified, more whole? Perhaps it does. Perhaps the tree is not just another plant, but a statement. This is not merely growth. This is a home. Around the tree, life gathers. Birds perch on its branches, shaking loose seeds that drift into the waiting soil below. Insects crawl along its bark, finding crevices to rest in. The shade beneath its branches creates a new kind of microclimate, cooler moisture. A pocket of calm on the iceberg's restless surface. Even the snow drifts differently around it, caught by branches that bend but never break. A birch in particular adds magic to the scene. Its white bark peels in thin layers, like pages of an ancient book left fluttering in the wind. Each strip seems to tell a story of seasons survived, storms endured, summers cherished. If the tree could speak, it might tell you, I stand not because it is easy, but because others made a place for me. It's not just poetic, it's practical. In nature, birch trees are known as nurse species. They enrich the soil with leaf litter, providing nutrients for other plants. Their roots help stabilize loose ground. Their canopy creates shelter for seedlings to grow. Here they are, midwives of the iceberg forest, ensuring the fragile ecosystem has a chance to deepen. Willows, too, offer quiet strength. Some Arctic willows creep across the ground like a vine. Others rise into twisted, gnarled shapes, their branches tough against wind. Their leaves shimmer silver green in the light, catching the sun and making the whole forest glimmer faintly against the blue of the ice. Imagine standing among them and hearing the breeze whistle through their leaves, a sound like hushed applause for their courage. You might wonder, are these trees truly at home here, or just guests passing through the iceberg itself, shifts beneath them melting slowly from below, creaking as ocean currents carve its shape? And yet the trees hold firm their roots, binding into every available pocket of soil. They remind you of mountain climbers anchoring themselves to sheer cliffs with ropes and spikes, trusting their grip despite the impossible terrain. The iceberg seems to accept their presence. Meltwater streams veer toward their roots, feeding them. Sunlight glances off their bark, warming them slightly. Even the sea spray that sometimes coats the iceberg feels like a strange baptism, salting their bark but not breaking their resolve. And so the forest rises another step, no longer just mats of green and shrubs huddling close, but trunks and branches lifting into the air. Small, yes, compared to the forests you know on land, but immense in symbolism. Here, against all odds, trees have taken root in a world made of ice. Pause for a moment in that vision, the shimmering bark, the low canopy, the stubborn willows crawling over frozen ridges. Wouldn't you sit beneath one feeling its shade, listening to the creak of the iceberg beneath you and the whisper of leaves above? Wouldn't you marvel at how life insists on finding a way, no matter how strange the stage? This is not just survival, it is the quiet triumph of persistence. And with these trees, the iceberg forest begins to resemble something familiar, something you might even call home, even though it floats restlessly on the wide, restless sea. With trees now standing, the iceberg begins to hum with new energy. Where once there was only white silence, now there are wings. Birds arrive, almost as if summoned by the branches. The first to visit are curious wanderers, gulls that circle above their voices, sharp against the soft horizon. They rest for a while on birch branches, leaving behind tiny traces that, without knowing, enrich the soil below. Soon after come the smaller ones, snow buntings, their feathers flecked with chestnut and white like tiny brushstrokes of color fluttering against the sky. Imagine watching them weave through the sparse branches of dwarf willows, hopping delicately from twig to twig. They seem to test the forest like a new playground, their chirps filling the air with lively notes. For the first time, the iceberg forest has a soundtrack more complex than the wind's lonely whistle. Some birds come not just to rest, but to stay. The willows and birches provide perches where they can sing and court. Twigs become nesting material carefully gathered and woven. In crevices softened with moss, eggs are tucked away like little treasures. The trees themselves seem to smile at this, their branches cradling new life. Close your eyes and imagine hearing it, the soft crackle of ice, shifting below the rush of meltwater streams, and layered atop it all the flutter and song of birds, a lullaby of coexistence. But where birds nest, insects follow. Their tiny bodies buzz between flowers, darting along bark, seeking nectar in the shy blossoms of willow catkins. A single willow can host hundreds of insects, each one pollinating, nibbling, or simply passing through. These little travelers don't just feed themselves, they feed the birds who pluck them from leaves and bark with cheerful efficiency. The web tightens, the circle widens. And then, as though scripted in some ancient play, mammals venture in. Perhaps first the Arctic hare nosing about with whiskers twitching drawn to tender shoots and the safety of low shrubs. Their paws leave tracks in the soft soil, pressing stories into the earth. If you followed them, you'd see where they paused, to nibble where they crouched to rest, where they darted away at the call of a bird. The soil, too, deepens under this new activity. Droppings, feathers molted, fur, all of it, folds into the ground, enriching it further. The iceberg is becoming a kind of ark, carrying not only ice and plants, but an entire cast of characters. You might ask yourself, at what point does a forest stop being an experiment and start being a community? Is it when mosses first take root, when shrubs blossom? Or is it this moment when creatures with hearts and eyes and voices choose to live here, not just pass through? A pair of Arctic foxes might slip in next. Imagine them with their thick white coats blending into snow patches, only their dark eyes giving them away. They sniff curiously at birch roots dart. After birds then vanish again, leaving paw prints like delicate stars across the ground. If they stay, they may den among the roots, using the soil warmed by plant life as shelter. And perhaps, just perhaps, a reindeer wanders across a natural bridge of frozen ridges drawn by the scent of lichen and shrubs. Its hooves crunch against the ice, its breath steaming in the air. To see such a large creature among the fragile birches is almost dreamlike. It bends its head, antlers brushing branches, and grazes slowly. The iceberg trembles faintly beneath its weight, yet holds. Scientists note that where trees and shrubs grow, biodiversity flourishes exponentially. A single birch stand can increase insect populations by hundreds of % compared to open tundra. Bird diversity rises in step as each species finds new niches. Seed eaters, insect hunters, nest builders. This iceberg forest, though small, follows the same rules. Each new arrival multiplies the possibilities. Picture the branches of a birch in midsummer. A snow bunting sings from its crown, a caterpillar inches along its bark, while below moss cushions the paws of a hare. The tree itself, ancient seeming though young, hums with activity. It is no longer just a tree, it is a stage, a host, a pillar of connection. And in the evenings, when the low sun casts everything in gold, the whole forest feels alive. The birds quiet down, nests hidden among the leaves. Insects retreat into bark and petals. The mammals curl into burrows or thickets. Even the iceberg itself seems to sigh, creaking gently as it drifts on, carrying its unlikely cargo. If you stood there in that twilight hush, wouldn't you feel a strange tenderness for it all? A lump of ancient ice once destined only to melt into the sea, now transformed into a cradle of life. Isn't that worth marveling over? The forest, once a whisper of moss, is now a chorus of wings and footsteps. The iceberg, once silent, is now alive with beating hearts. Life is noisy now, though not the kind of noise that disturbs you. It is the gentle layering of sounds that comes when creatures claim a place as home. The iceberg forest, once empty, now hums like a village in the making. The trees are no longer just trees. They've become apartment complexes. In hollows of birch bark, insects curl up like quiet tenants. Beneath the branches, birds tuck their nests against the wood, weaving moss and twigs into sturdy cradles. And on the ground, Arctic hares, puffins, and foxes scurry about their paths, crossing and overlapping in the shared marketplace of food, shelter, and survival. Picture the puffins with their clownish beaks, painted in bright orange, waddling to their burrows carved into softened soil. Every arrival is a tiny comic opera wings flapping furiously, feet skittering across moss as if they've just remembered gravity exists. Yet their presence matters. Their guano, rich in nitrogen, seeps into the soil, making every sprout a little greener, every blossom a little bolder. You could almost imagine the birches whispering thanks as their leaves unfurl wider. Not far away, an Arctic hare nibbles on a young willow, its teeth clipping the branches neatly. You might think the hare is destructive, but in truth, it acts like a gardener. By pruning it, encourages new growth, shaping shrubs into denser, healthier forms. Its droppings, too, enrich the soil, adding another thread to the weave of fertility. The forest smiles at this collaboration. It is less a competition, more a chorus, where every voice has a place. Foxes arrive next, sleek and cautious, slipping between tree trunks like shadows. They test the air with sharp noses, tracking scents of birds and hares. But they're not only hunters, they're caretakers in their own way. By controlling populations of smaller animals, they keep balance, and when they bury food and forget about it, seeds hidden in their meals find second lives sprouting months later in unexpected corners. The forest grows because of their forgetfulness. Have you ever thought of animals as farmers without knowing it? A puffin digging a burrow tills the soil. A fox caching food plants seeds. A hare trims willow branches into shape. Ask yourself, when you look at a wild creature, do you see chaos, or do you see a kind of gardener at work? Insects, too, expand their numbers. Beetles scuttle under leaves, some chewing, some decomposing fallen matter. Flies hover at flowers, spreading pollen with every landing. Butterflies, rare but possible in warmer seasons, flutter briefly tiny paintings against a white and green canvas. They are fragile, fleeting, yet their impact is deep. Without them, blossoms would wither. Without purpose, seeds would remain unformed. And seeds, those quiet travelers, continue to arrive. Some cling to bird feathers dropped as gifts upon mossy floors. Others drift on winds that coil over oceans, landing gently on leafy canopies. The iceberg forest becomes a collector's chest of genetic diversity, each addition widening the palette of possibility. Science tells us that even a handful of trees can create microclimates. A cluster of birches can trap warmth, reducing wind speed and allowing air temperatures beneath their canopy to rise by several degrees. This means that while the oceanic wind outside might bite at 10 degrees C inside the forest, it may hover at a gentler 5 degrees C. That tiny difference can be the line between death and survival for many small creatures. The trees are like guardians, wrapping their arms around the community, shielding them from the world's harshness. Imagine the soundscape of this village. Birds chirp from branches. Puffins mutter and cluck in burrows. Insects hum like a low string section. The fox's soft paws press the soil almost inaudible, and beneath it all the iceberg itself groans and sighs, the old elder of this gathering, carrying everyone along across the sea. By now the forest is not only a home, but a storybook. Every track in the soil, every feather snagged on a twig, every chewed leaf is a line of narrative. You could trace them like words here. The hare dined here, the fox sniffed here, the puffin stumbled clumsily into its hole. The forest records them, storing memory in living ink. And there is more yet to come. Where animals settle, predators follow. The fox is one, but what of owls swooping from higher branches or falcons circling overhead? Their wings might one day slice across the iceberg sky, bringing new tension, new songs. The forest doesn't resist, it welcomes. Every arrival is a new note in the melody, a new stitch in the fabric. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing among the birches. A puffin waddles past, giving you a curious glance before ducking underground. A hare darts by, soft as snow in motion. Above, a bird sings its song, rising over the creak of the ice. You breathe in the air tinged with salt moss and the faint sweetness of blossoms. For just a heartbeat, the forest feels eternal, though you know it drifts temporary as a dream. Isn't it remarkable? You might wonder that something so fleeting could feel so full, so permanent in spirit. The iceberg may melt tomorrow, but tonight it carries a village of life across the endless blue. And that village, though it floats on borrowed time, thrives as though it has forever. As more creatures arrive, the atmosphere changes. What was once a quiet garden has become a symphony, and now it matures into a society. You can feel it when you listen closely. The rhythms are not random. There's a pattern, a balance, as if invisible agreements hold the community together. The trees stretch higher their crowns, whispering like gossiping neighbors. Birds flit from branch to branch, carrying not only seeds, but rules territories drawn in song, invisible fences built for melody. Puffins may cluck below, but sparrows and terns answer above, each insisting on their share of air. Even the insects take lanes weaving like traffic in miniature, their roots etched by instinct older than the iceberg itself. The birches now wear cloaks of lichen, mottled greens and silvers that catch the light in sleepy glimmers. The lichens are not passive. They farm sunlight, turn air into food, and slowly chew at bark and rock alike. They seem patient, yet they are architects reshaping the surfaces they rest upon. The forest becomes less pristine, more lived-in textured, like a city street corner where history gathers in layers. Imagine for a moment, bending down to touch the ground. Beneath your fingers is not ice, but soil, rich, damp, filled with wriggling worms. Yes, worms somehow brought here by clinging to roots, or bird feet now tunneling like engineers, turning frost-stiffened earth into fertile chambers. With each wriggle they aerate the soil, whispering life into its lungs. Without them, plants would choke, roots would drown. With them, the forest breathes. Ask yourself, how does order emerge out of chance? How can a drifting block of ice cracked and ancient become not just a garden, but a functioning society? Isn't it strange that life knows how to cooperate, even in places where it has no map, no history, no blueprint? Predators deepen the story. A snowy owl swoops in one evening, its wings wide and ghostly against the northern twilight. It perches high in a birch, its golden eyes unblinking, its head swiveling in almost comic circles. Yet its presence is more than hunger, it is regulation. Each hare it hunts prevents overgrazing, each mouse it catches keeps balance. Even in death the forest thrives. The owl is not cruel, it is a caretaker dressed in feathers of winter. On another day you might see a falcon streak across the sky, its cry sharp as glass breaking. Its dive is fast, precise, a punctuation mark in the air. A sparrow falls, but from the sparrow's absence grows opportunity. Fewer beaks competing for the same seeds, fewer wings crowding the canopy. Balance tilts, then steadies, as though the forest keeps books on survival numbers, always recalculated, debts always paid. Science would call this a trophic cascade, energy flowing downward through levels of life. Grass to hare, hare to owl, owl to fox, fox back to soil. Nothing wasted, every act a circle that feeds another. Yet when you listen in this sleepy moment, it feels less like a diagram and more like a bedtime story of cooperation. Every character playing a role, none truly villain or hero. Fungi join in quietly, as they always do. Their mycelium threads stretch through the soil like networks of glowing veins. These threads act as messengers, passing signals between roots, warnings of pests, gifts of nutrients, whispers of survival. Imagine the birches leaning toward each other like old friends saying, "I have sugar today. Would you like some? Or beware, a beetle is chewing at your roots." Even here on a floating slab of ice, a community builds itself beneath your feet, unseen but strong. The air itself begins to change. Carbon dioxide drawn in by leaves is exhaled again as oxygen filling the spaces between branches with fresher breath. The temperature stabilizes, the soil darkens, humidity clings like a soft veil. The iceberg, white and sharp-edged, now wears a green heart that radiates warmth into its frozen body. Perhaps even the ice feels younger, comforted by the living blanket above it. And what of you walking softly among them? The fox pauses, curious. The owl swivels its head toward you. but does not fly away. The puffins waddle past unconcerned. You are accepted into the rhythm not as an intruder, but as another element in the unfolding balance. Have you noticed how quickly you feel at home in this drifting forest, how easily your own breathing slips into harmony with it? Numbers matter here too. A single puffin colony can drop hundreds of kilograms of guano in one season, fertilizing more ground than rain alone could manage. A small grove of birches can lower wind speed by up to 30%, enough to protect fragile blossoms from freezing gusts. An owl may eat 3 to 5 small mammals a night, keeping populations from swelling into destruction. Behind the gentle poetry lies mathematics, precise and invisible, orchestrating stability. The iceberg floats, carrying its new society across waters that ripple with moonlight. From above, a passing gull might look down and see not ice, but an island alive. It might seem impossible, a contradiction, but life doesn't ask permission. It builds where it can, insists on being, and makes order from chance. So the iceberg is no longer alone. It is a stage, a cradle, a moving village where balance is maintained by countless small hands and wings and roots. Every death is food, every seed, a promise, every sound, a note in the symphony. You wonder if such order can form here on ice adrift, then how many other secret societies thrive unseen in places we call barren. Perhaps the universe is more social than we imagine, always ready to build a forest where we least expect it. Night falls, but the iceberg forest does not sleep in silence. It hums differently, like a lullaby sung by 100 unseen voices. The wind softens, slipping through branches with a sighing tone. The puffins tuck their heads under their wings, the fox curls into its fur, but the world remains alive in ways you don't expect. The night is not absence, it is transformation. The birches glow faintly, their pale bark catching threads of moonlight, as though they were painted with frost, even in summer. Their leaves, darker now, rustle with secrets. Between the roots, fungi bloom in quiet pulses of bioluminescence, soft green and blue glows like lanterns scattered across the soil. Each pulse is a signal, a flicker of chemical messages. Science tells you that some fungi do glow this way, often to attract insects that can spread their spores. Yet here in this floating grove they seem more like storytellers, glowing with the steady patience of those who hold knowledge longer than any owl or fox. Imagine crouching down to watch one of those fungi closer. Its cap shines faintly, veins visible beneath the surface like tiny constellations. A moth flutters near, drawn to the glow, its wings dusted with powdery scales that brush against the fungi, carrying spores further afield. A small, almost invisible collaboration, one glowing one, moving, both sharing in a cycle that ensures their survival. Have you thought how often beauty is just a survival trick, and yet even when you know that it doesn't take away the wonder, it deepens it? Owls patrol silently above. Their wings slice air without a sound, thanks to fringed feathers that dampen turbulence. Each wing beat is nearly noiseless, an evolutionary marvel of stealth. As they glide past, they look like shadows pretending to be alive. But even shadows have purpose. Each rodent caught prevents roots from being devoured. Without the owl's patrol, the forest would falter. The night, then, is not danger, it is maintenance. Insects rise in subtle clouds, silhouetted against the moon's silver arc. They form swarms that glitter when caught in faint beams of light, like constellations shifting alive, restless. The bats join in, small and quick, darting through the air like punctuation marks in a long flowing sentence. Every squeak, though beyond your hearing, maps the air for them. Each moth caught is energy redirected, folded back into the cycle. And below the canopy, the soil does not rest. Worms tunnel, beetles crawl, fungi exhale. Roots shift slowly, pulling moisture from thaw pockets, sending sugars to neighbors. The mycelium network, glowing faintly, remains awake. Imagine if you could listen what their conversations would sound like. Would they whisper in pulses of light, in waves of chemistry, in the silence between your own breaths? The forest at night is less visible, but more connected. Its threads stretched, taut, humming like strings of an unseen harp. Now ask yourself, is night an interruption, or simply another page in the same story? Is sleep the absence of life, or just a different form of its song? The iceberg forest seems to suggest the latter, that night does not end the day. It continues it in a slower, dreamlike rhythm. Above it all, the stars shimmer, with a clarity only found where air is crisp and clean. They scatter like spilled salt across velvet darkness. You tilt your head back and notice how the forest mirrors the sky, glowing fungi echo constellations on the ground, while fireflies add sudden sparks of gold like shooting stars. The iceberg floats between two skies, one above one below each, filled with light, each alive in its own way. Science slips in here as well. The glow of fungi is caused by luciferin, a compound reacting with oxygen to produce light. Fireflies use a similar trick, but they can flash in patterns, coded signals of attraction. Fungi glow steadily, like a lantern left in the window, but fireflies blink like messengers sending love notes. Two different strategies, both producing beauty, both ensuring survival. Isn't it curious that survival so often wears the mask of wonder? Far in the distance you hear ice shifting. The body of the iceberg groans deep and slow, like the turning of a giant in its sleep. Cracks ripple faintly, sending vibrations through roots and soil. The forest does not panic, it simply adjusts. Roots grow into new cracks, fungi colonize the raw surfaces, lichens spread their paint. Even collapse becomes opportunity. You wonder, is fragility always a weakness, or can it be the start of renewal? The fox stirs, lifting its head to glance at the glowing mushrooms, then rests again. Its breath rises like smoke in the cold air. You feel yourself slow with it, sinking into the rhythm of night, where everything is quieter, but nothing is truly still. The forest is not asleep, it is dreaming, and you are part of the dream. Numbers hide, even in the calm. A single owl can hear prey beneath 30 centimeters of snow, its hearing so precise it can catch a vole it cannot see. Fungi glow at wavelengths between 520 and 530 nanometers, just the right green to stand out against the dark forest. Fireflies flash between 1 and 2 times per second in their most active displays. Even the silence is filled with measurable wonders, though they do not ask you to measure, only to notice. The iceberg drifts, glowing faintly, from within its crown of life. If you could see it from afar, you might think it was a ship, carrying lanterns, or a floating festival of light. But it is not decoration, it is survival, beauty born from necessity. And isn't that perhaps the most comforting thought? That even in darkness, life finds ways to shine. You breathe deeply, letting the night's rhythm fold around you. The glow, the hush, the slow sway of branches, the silent glide of wings. It all settles into you like a soft blanket. The forest on ice dreams, and you drift with it, floating between stars and soil, between silence and song. Dawn arrives slowly with a blush instead of a blaze. The iceberg forest awakens not with alarms, but with the gradual lifting of shadows. The horizon brightens in shades of rose and silver as though the sky were dipping its brush into watercolor. You sit with it, noticing how the forest exhales, branches loosen leaves, stretch, and the air carries a different scent, lighter touched with salt and dew. The trees wear mourning like a shawl. Their leaves catch droplets of condensation, each bead sparkling briefly before sliding down into the soil. A spruce sighs, shaking loose a tiny flurry of moisture. The fox yawns, stretching, and trots off toward the shoreline, leaving paw prints darkened in damp moss. Puffins stir, shaking wings and lifting their beaks toward the first light. Above, the sky fills with migrating shapes. You notice the first V formation of geese, dark strokes across the pale canvas of morning. They call to each other in low, honking notes, the rhythm of teamwork echoing across the water. Have you ever wondered how they decide who leads, who follows, and when to shift? Science offers an answer. The leader breaks the air, reducing drag, while those behind gain ease in flight. When the leader tires, another takes its place. A quiet democracy in motion, powered by instinct and shared survival. More birds join the sky ballet turns with their sharp, angular wings, gulls wheeling like loose commas, and the elegant arcs of swans that reflect the pink of the dawn in their feathers. Each wingbeat writes a temporary line against the air, erased but never forgotten. The iceberg forest becomes a stage framed by sky, each creature a dancer stepping into its part. Below, smaller lives awaken too. Bees begin their rounds, testing blossoms still beaded with dew. You watch one land on a violet flower legs, already dusted with yellow pollen like a baker who's dipped hands into flour. Another joins, then another buzzing softly, as though tuning instruments for the day's performance. Their work is not random, it follows invisible patterns. Bees can see ultraviolet markings on flowers, guiding them like runways toward nectar. To you, the blossoms look simple. To them, they are neon signs pointing the way. Pause a moment and think how much color exists beyond what your eyes can catch. How much sound beyond what your ears can hear. Nature's symphony is broader than your senses, yet still you catch enough to be mesmerized. Perhaps that's part of its kindness, showing you just enough beauty to marvel while still holding deeper secrets in reserve. The trees, too, shift with dawn. Birch bark brightens no longer ghostly in the moonlight, but glowing warm like pale skin touched by firelight. The spruce needles glisten sharp and fragrant, their resin warm to release a tang of pine into the air. The morning breeze carries it to you, mingling with the briny hint of the sea and the earthy hum of soil. Insects stir mosquitoes, form delicate spirals. Dragonflies patrol like tiny helicopters, wings catching sparks of sunlight. Their buzzing fills gaps between bird calls, creating a layered texture of sound. The forest hums as though it has tuned itself for the day. The iceberg itself responds, its crystalline body gleaming differently now. What was silver at night becomes blue-white in daylight, fractured with rainbows where ice crystals refract the sun. The forest perches like a crown of emerald atop this shimmering throne, the contrast almost regal. From afar, it must look as though the sea has grown a garden and set it adrift, a floating miracle of green. Science whispers beneath the poetry. Icebergs reflect more sunlight than ocean water, a phenomenon called albedo. This helps keep surrounding air cooler, maintaining microclimates where delicate lives can persist. The forest in turn adds warmth, darkening patches with soil and foliage subtly changing how the iceberg absorbs or reflects light. Two forces in quiet balance, ice-cooling forest warming, neither dominating, both adapting. The puffins take flight, their wings beating furiously, faster than seems possible for birds their size. They skim the water's surface, feet tapping briefly like stones, skipping across a pond before rising into the air. They head out for fish, their morning commute as steady as yours might be toward work or school. You can almost imagine them carrying tiny briefcases, though instead they'll return with beaks full of shimmering silver fish for their young. The fox reappears, pausing to sniff the air. Its fur glows with the new light, red gold against the green and white. It moves with quiet confidence, slipping between trunks, brushing against low ferns, vanishing and reappearing like a thought you can't quite hold on to. In its path, it disturbs beetles that scuttle deeper into soil ants that scramble back to hidden tunnels, and a single hare that bounds away ears, catching the sun like translucent leaves. Life gathers in layers. Some soar, some creep, some hum, some simply stand and drink the light. The forest on ice does not favor one way, it holds all ways in harmony. You wonder if every creature has a rhythm what is yours. Is it fast, like the bees, steady, like the geese, or patient like the spruce? The iceberg doesn't answer, but it seems to suggest that all rhythms belong and all are needed. The numbers deepen your sense of wonder. Geese can migrate up to 5,000 kilometers, often flying at altitudes of 9,000 meters higher than most clouds. Bees can visit 50 to 100 flowers in a single trip, carrying pollen that may fertilize thousands more. Dragonflies have been around for over 300 million years, long before birds ever traced the sky. Every morning that unfolds here rests on ancient endurance. As the sun lifts higher, the forest shimmers with a soft vibrancy. Dew vanishes into air, mist curls away from ice, and the chorus of calls and buzzes swells. It is a waking symphony, improvised, but precise, a performance repeated for millennia, and yet always new. You find yourself caught in its rhythm, breathing with it, your pulse sinking to the flutter of wings, the sway of branches, the glide of drifting clouds. And so, morning settles fully onto the iceberg forest, its crown alive with flight and song. The night's whispers fade, replaced by daylight chatter, yet the sense of wonder only grows. You are reminded that every dawn is not simply a repetition, it is a gift, freshly unwrapped, different each time. The forest knows this, and now perhaps so do you. As the morning matures into midday, the light sharpens and spreads across the forest like liquid gold. Shadows shorten, textures become crisper, and every surface reveals more of itself. The iceberg beneath glows with an intensity you hadn't noticed before, radiating an almost translucent blue, like frozen flame captured in stone. The forest perched on its icy raft hums louder, now busier, warmer, more alive. You notice how the heat of the sun plays a gentle game with the ice. The surface softens in certain places, droplets trickling down into small channels that carve new paths. The iceberg is never still, not truly. It breathes in cycles of freezing and melting, reshaping itself in slow motion. Imagine it as an artist always editing its sculpture, erasing one detail here, carving another there, never satisfied with a final version. The forest adjusts without complaint, roots shifting as if to say, "Where you lead will follow." The midday chorus rises. Birds that sang at dawn now switch to foraging duties, leaving the stage for buzzing insects, croaking amphibians, and the soft rustle of leaves catching the wind. A dragonfly hovers, wings shimmering like panes of stained glass, before darting to chase a smaller insect. Frogs croak from hidden pockets of pooled meltwater, their voices low and rhythmic like distant drums. You lean closer to one such pool and notice tadpoles darting in sudden bursts, their tails flicking them from shadow to light. In weeks, they'll grow legs, climb the moss, and join the choir above. Pause and wonder how many transformations happen right now, unseen beneath roots, within cocoons, or deep in soil. How many tiny worlds are changing unnoticed by the eye. Science tells you that even in a square meter of soil, billions of bacteria and countless fungi spin invisible webs of life, breaking down matter, creating nutrients, supporting the towering trees above. It's like a hidden economy, one that never crashes, never needs a bailout, endlessly cycling. The heat draws you toward the idea of a photosynthesis, the silent feast happening all around you. Trees, moss, and flowers open their green arms to the sun, catching photons as though they were gifts dropped from the sky. Inside their leaves, chlorophyll holds court, turning light into sugar fueling growth. Every breath you take owes itself to this unseen alchemy. You inhale and feel it, oxygen fresh from the forge of leaves, as though the forest has baked you a loaf of air, warm and ready. The puffins return wings whirring as they land clumsily among the grasses. Their beaks gleam silver, crammed with fish that glitter like necklaces of quicksilver. One drops its catch, and a gull swoops in, snatching the prize with a sharp cry. There's no anger in the puffin, only a shake of its head, as if saying, "There's always more fish to catch." You smile at the thought. How often do you hold on to loss when nature simply moves on? The fox snaps now curled in a sunny patched chest, rising and falling in steady rhythm. You notice how it has carved a small hollow in the moss, a perfect fox-shaped impression. If it were to leave, you'd still see the memory of its presence. The forest records every visitor this way, tracks impressions, droppings fallen feathers, quiet signatures written into its fabric. You wonder, what signature do you leave wherever you go? Above, the geese return to rest, gliding in and settling on the water beside the iceberg. Their reflections ripple with each movement, doubling the sky's story. A butterfly flits by its wings, orange and black, landing on a bright flower swaying in the midday breeze. Its colors feel almost too bold against the pale background of ice, a reminder that nature often paints outside the lines. Did you know butterflies can taste with their feet? Each landing is not only graceful, it's a kind of sampling, a tiny banquet beneath their toes. Science brings you another layer of understanding. Icebergs like this, carrying soil and seeds, may contribute to something larger. When they melt, they release not only fresh water, but also nutrients into the ocean. Iron, nitrogen, and phosphorus spill into the sea, feeding plankton, the microscopic gardeners of Earth. And plankton, in turn, make half the oxygen you breathe. So here on this drifting forest, you're standing in the middle of an oxygen factory, trees above, plankton below. The iceberg itself becomes a broker between worlds, connecting sky, land, and sea. The bees work tirelessly, their buzz a steady hum that fills the silence between larger sounds. You watch one land again, then fly off toward another flower, tracing invisible lines in the air. Researchers once tracked bee foraging and found they optimize routes like living mathematicians, solving complex travel problems instinctively. What feels like randomness to your eyes is actually geometry and memory at play. Imagine that a brain smaller than a sesame seed, calculating pathways as efficiently as supercomputers. Your thoughts drift with the breeze as it rustles through the leaves. The wind carries warmth across the iceberg, teasing ripples on the pools, bending tall grass, lifting seeds into the air. Dandelions release parachutes that float away, some landing softly, others whisked farther toward the ocean's horizon. Each one is a story seed, perhaps destined to find soil on another drifting berg or maybe lost to the sea. Still, each carries hope, and isn't that enough? The iceberg's surface trickles louder now, a chorus of droplets falling into channels, collecting in rivulets, pouring gently toward the sea. The sound is soft but persistent, like a clock ticking in liquid form. Time passes here not in minutes, but in drips and flows. If you listen closely, you realize that even melting has a melody, one that lulls rather than alarms. Numbers enrich the scene further. A large iceberg like this can release billions of liters of fresh water as it melts enough to quench entire cities. One tree can transpire up to 200 liters of water per day, breathing moisture back into the air. A single bee colony can pollinate millions of flowers in a season, sustaining whole landscapes. These figures, when whispered into your ears, become lullabies of scale, reminding you that vastness and smallness are equally necessary. And so midday stretches on. The forest leans into its chores, the animals move with purpose, the ice hums its slow song, and the sky watches overhead. You sit among it, all breathing with it, noticing how every life here accepts its place in the pattern. There is no resistance, no complaint, just participation in the unfolding story. You let that realization soften you, like sunlight soaking into bark, like water nourishing roots. Perhaps you too belong more easily than you thought. Perhaps you don't need to push so hard. The iceberg forest shows you that harmony is not about control, it's about presence. And here in the heart of drifting green and white presence feels as simple as breathing. The sun tilts westward now, slipping past its fierce noon height and softening into a gentler arc. The shadows lengthen again, stretching like sleepy arms across moss and ice. The forest exhales in a slower rhythm, as if relieved that the peak of brightness has passed. The iceberg beneath sighs too, its meltwater trickles easing into calmer streams. Afternoon arrives not with fanfare, but with a warm, unhurried hum. You notice the fox stirring, blinking awake in its mossy cradle. It yawns, baring teeth, sharp, but innocent in their context, just another tool of survival, no malice behind them. The fox stretches its fur, glowing copper under the mellowing light, and trots off toward a cluster of shrubs. With each paw step, the moss springs back, resilient, forgiving, as though the land itself has infinite patience for those who tread upon it. Above, the geese shift again, lifting off with wings that beat the water into temporary froth. Their V formation reforms overhead, a moving arrow pointing toward horizons unseen. You wonder, how do they know where to go, what direction to choose when the sky offers no roads? Science tells you it is magnetism, a sense humans once shared faintly, but have largely forgotten. Tiny magnetic crystals in their heads let them feel the Earth's pull like a compass written in flesh. Imagine if you could close your eyes right now and sense north, not as a thought, but as a tug in your bones. The bees continue tireless, but even their pace eases as though the temperature of the day persuades them to slow. The flowers tilt with the breeze, their petals catching sunlight at lazy angles. A butterfly flutters past again, slower this time, wings moving with the unhurried beat of a heart sinking into drowsy peace. You watch it land on a sunlit patch of ice, where droplets glisten, and you realize the butterfly drinks from meltwater, as if sipping from a crystal chalice. A question drifts into your mind. Can ice and warmth really belong together? Doesn't one erase the other? Yet here in this drifting oasis, the forest proves otherwise. The trees root in ice, warmed by soil, bathed in light, cooled by meltwater. Opposites hold hands and thrive. Science affirms the paradox: icebergs melt from below, as warm seawater laps against them, even as cold winds preserve their crowns. It's a balance of destruction and preservation that sustains them for years, sometimes decades. Numbers arrive to deepen the lull. A large iceberg might take 10 years to fully melt, traveling thousands of kilometers in its lifetime. Along the way, it may release hundreds of millions of tons of sediment and nutrients into the sea. One iceberg can fertilize blooms of phytoplankton across hundreds of square kilometers, turning the ocean into a vast, green soup of life. In a quiet way, this chunk of ice becomes an oceanic gardener, scattering invisible seeds. The puffins return from yet another fishing flight, their beaks once more stuffed with silver. They nestle together, sharing food with their chicks, hidden in burrows beneath tufts of grass. If you listen closely, you can hear the faint peeps of the chicks, tiny voices echoing up from the soil. The forest is not only alive, it is raising new life with every passing moment. The fox pauses by the water's edge, nose twitching. It drinks from a rivulet of meltwater, lapping carefully, leaving ripples that bend the reflected sky. You wonder, does the fox know it is standing on a floating world, surrounded by miles of deep, shifting ocean? Or is its world simply moss and water, puffins and geese, sunlight and shadow? Perhaps knowing less allows for more peace. The sun lowers further and the air cools. The breeze freshens, carrying a salty tang from the sea. Leaves rustle more urgently, whispering of change, as though preparing for what the evening may bring. You notice how the iceberg shifts slightly, turning with the current, redirecting the flow of its meltwater streams. The forest leans too, as though subtly bowing to the turn. Nothing resists, everything flows. Pause with that thought. What if your life too could bend without breaking flow, without resisting? What if movement didn't mean losing yourself, but finding a new way of being? The iceberg reminds you that to float is not to drift aimlessly. It is to trust the currents, to carry you where you need to be. A raven appears, dark wings slicing against the pale sky. It lands atop a tree, tilts its head, and croaks with a voice like cracking ice. Ravens, you recall, are some of the most intelligent of birds, able to solve puzzles, remember faces, even play games. You watch it tug at a branch, testing its strength, perhaps imagining it as part of a nest. The raven's eyes glimmer with curiosity, as if it too wonders what you are doing here. The light continues its soft descent, and you notice how colors change. The greens of the moss deepen into velvet, the ice shifts from bright blue to softer turquoise, and the sky takes on the faintest hints of amber. Everything leans toward gentleness. Afternoon gives itself away freely, fading into the longer shadows of evening. You sit back, letting the sounds wash over you. The bees' softened hum, the puffin's distant chatter, the raven's rasp, the steady drip of meltwater. Each sound overlaps like instruments in a symphony without conductor, yet perfectly timed. Even silence plays its part, filling the spaces between notes. You can almost imagine the iceberg forest humming you a lullaby, low and ancient. The fox, now full of water, pads quietly into the undergrowth, its tail swishing like a paintbrush through grass. The raven lifts again, wings wide, carried by the cooling air. The geese vanish into the distance, leaving faint echoes of their calls. Only the butterflies remain drifting like fragments of sunlight, too light to sink. And you still here, still breathing with it, part of this drifting miracle. The afternoon teaches you something subtle. Not every moment needs to shout to be meaningful. Some simply breathe, and in breathing they matter. Evening arrives slowly like a gentle hand dimming the lantern of the sky. The sun slips lower, painting the ice with blushes of gold, rose, and lavender. The berg itself seems to glow from within its crystalline body, capturing the last of the day's warmth and holding it in luminous veins. The forest above responds in kind, leaves glisten with a soft sheen. Bark darkens into silhouettes, and the moss becomes a velvet carpet tinted with twilight. You breathe it in the air cooler, now edged with the chill of nightfall. The breeze shifts no longer playful, but steady, guiding seabirds back toward their nesting ledges and pushing faint ripples across the meltwater pools. Everything seems to settle, as though the entire floating world is tucking itself under a blanket of shadow. The puffins finish their last flights, wings whirring in the fading light. They huddle into their burrows, their colorful beaks closing like painted shutters. The chicks grow quiet, lulled by the warmth of feathers and the fading hum of day. The fox curls up once more, tail wrapped snugly around its nose, the very picture of a creature surrendering to peace. Even the raven, that clever sentinel of the afternoon, has vanished into the distance, leaving only its memory against the branches. And then, as the sun finally kisses the horizon, the true marvel begins. The ice sparkles as though 1,000 tiny stars have already descended, trapped in each droplet, and crack. The forest darkens, yet it does not vanish. Instead, it begins to glow in subtler ways, the flowers closing like sleeping faces, the moss shimmering faintly as if dusted with starlight. Above the real stars pierce the growing indigo, one by one, patient and inevitable. You look up and notice how endless the sky feels when paired with the emptiness of the ocean below. There are no mountains, no towers, no walls to frame the horizon, only the roundness of earth, the arc of night, and you adrift between them. The iceberg carries you without effort, like a raft built by the cosmos. Science whispers here, too. As darkness deepens, the ice releases, the day's stored warmth, cooling rapidly, cracking faintly in expansion and contraction. The trees respond by slowing their breath, their stomata closing, conserving the day's energy. The bees retreat into the hollows they've carved, clustering together for warmth. Did you know a single honeybee vibrates its wing muscles to produce heat, raising its body temperature to nearly 38 degrees Celsius? Together they form a living furnace, surviving night after night on a drifting island of ice. The stars multiply now, and with them, the aurora begins to stir faint green tendrils, unfurling across the far horizon. It is as if the heavens themselves lean down to join the iceberg forest in its drifting dream. Curtains of light ripple silently, framing the treetops, brushing the ice with spectral hues. You cannot help but marvel. Does the forest know it is being painted by the sky? Do the trees, the moss, the fox, the bees sense the grandeur of their stage, or do they live, as always, rooted, buzzing, breathing, unaware of their own magnificence? Ask yourself, does beauty need an audience to exist, or does it simply radiate, indifferent to whether someone watches? The iceberg seems to answer, beauty is not a performance, but a presence. It happens whether or not you bear witness. The current carries the iceberg onward, unseen but undeniable. You can hear it faintly now, the groan of distant ice floes rubbing against one another, the hiss of waves cresting against frozen walls. The ocean cradles this floating world, endless and patient. Somewhere below, deep currents shift nutrients upward, feeding plankton blooms that feed krill, that feed whales. In that chain, in that cycle, the iceberg forest plays its quiet role. It is not just a drifting oddity, but a link in the grand unbroken circle of life. The aurora brightens, the stars sharpen, and you, sitting within this twilight forest, feel the enormity of time pressing softly against you. Icebergs are born, they drift, they melt, they vanish. Yet in their brief lives they hold forests, raise bees, feed oceans, shelter foxes, guide birds. A short life, but one filled with purpose. Perhaps that is enough for ice, for forests, for us. The night deepens, the fox dreams, the puffins sleep, the bees huddle, the iceberg hums. And you, perhaps, your eyelids are heavy now too, slipping into their own kind of twilight. Take one more long look at the stars above, at the aurora painting the sky, at the moss glowing faintly under starlight. Let it settle in your chest. You are afloat on something vast, and yet it holds you with gentleness. You are part of its drifting story, now carried softly forward. Now let the pace slow even further. Breathe with the forest, in and out, long and quiet. Imagine the moss softening beneath you, cradling your body as if it knows you are weary. The air cools, but it is not harsh. It is refreshing, cleansing the kind of chill that clears away the clutter of thought and leaves only stillness. The iceberg rocks slightly with the motion of the ocean, a lullaby in movement. Each sway reassures you you are carried, never dropped. You are drifting, but never lost. The stars shimmer overhead, patient guides that have lit the night for millions of years, and they are here now, lighting your sky too. The aurora drapes across the heavens like silk curtains in slow motion, green and violet waves folding into one another. Their glow falls over the treetops, over the sleeping puffins, over the curled fox, over the hives where bees rest in warmth. Every creature on this iceberg surrenders to the night, and you are invited to do the same. Your breath slows, your thoughts soften. The weight of the day unravels thread by thread until only quiet remains. This forest perched on floating ice shows you that even in fragile places, peace grows, life thrives, and beauty persists. Let that thought be your pillow tonight. If you've enjoyed this journey, I'd be quietly grateful if you'd give this video a like or tap that subscribe button for more peaceful explorations with the sleepy scientist. It helps more than you might imagine. And before you drift off, I'd still love to know, where in the world are you listening? From what time it is there? Leave a comment if you're feeling cozy enough to share. It's always a quiet joy to see this sleepy little community ripple across time zones and continents. Good night. Sweet dreams.